You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 25th of June 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. It's 1500 in Tokyo, 9 a.m. in Beirut, 7 a.m. here in London and 2 a.m. in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Monocle Radio. The Globalist starts now. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead... Argentina's President Javier Milei has been on a controversial European tour, sparking protests in some locations. We'll ask if his trip was all about appeasing far-right leaders. We'll analyse the friendship between Vladimir Putin of Russia and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Then, US prosecutors are recommending criminal charges should be brought against aviation giant Boeing. We'll examine the company's woes and ask if it can recover. Plus...
There's been a spate of infrastructure projects across Zurich, including new tram lines, refreshed train stations and verdant parks in hitherto lesser served parts of the city.
A huge clue there as to the winner of the bronze medal in our Quality of Life survey ranking the most livable cities. We'll have a roundup of arts and culture news from Basel, and finally we'll look at why feathers are being ruffled in Germany over the fate of urban pigeons. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. 2 Israeli airstrikes targeting aid supplies killed at least 11 Palestinians in Gaza yesterday, medics said, as Israeli tanks pushed deeper into Rafah in the south and fought their way back into areas in the north they'd already subdued months ago. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is due to plead guilty on Wednesday to violating US espionage law in a deal that will end his imprisonment in Britain and allow him to return home to Australia after a 14-year legal odyssey. We'll have more on that story in just a moment. And the European Union will open membership talks with Ukraine today, giving the country a political boost in the midst of its war against Russia's invasion, although a long and tough road still lies ahead before it can join the bloc. Right, well, for more on that Assange story and other big stories in the papers, I'm joined now by Michael Peel, who's a science editor at the Financial Times. Michael, welcome to Monocle Radio. Many thanks for joining us. This story about Julian Assange, of course, is making front pages everywhere. Quite a good deal for him, it would appear. Tell us more.
Hello, yes, and thank you for having me on. Yes, big news overnight. This very long-running case in which Julian Assange has reportedly agreed to plead guilty to a single criminal count of conspiring to obtain and disclose classified US national defense documents, and that this would finally resolve this case, which has been going on for more than a decade now, well over a decade, to allow him to return to his home country of Australia.
But there are concerns that by actually pleading guilty to this is a big blow to freedom of the press and freedom of speech.
Well, this has been one of the big things going on throughout this case, and of course, it's had other dimensions as well. If you remember, it started off with an investigation in Sweden into accusations of sexual offences. In the end, those charges were dropped. But then, of course, has morphed into this case of that the US has brought as being the main focus, and of course led to Mr. Assange holding up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for several years, and now for several years being imprisoned in London, awaiting this process going forward.
I mean, I wonder what this means, though, for investigative and national security journalism, because he's actually pled guilty to it. What essentially it's being said here is that it is a crime.
Well, and I think there are very serious and valid concerns about that. I mean, to go back, of course, almost 15 years ago now, there was an enormous release of a trove of documents of US confidential US diplomatic cables, and that revealed a lot of information that was in the public interest to know about the views of US officials on various matters in countries around the world. Now, the argument was that the US supporters of the US case said, well, this was reckless. It compromised US security, endangered sources who were relied on for these documents, and so on. The argument from Julian Assange and his supporters was, well, that's nonsense. The documents were carefully analyzed and redacted when necessary to make sure that there was nothing that did endanger individuals, and so there's no doubt that a lot of the information in those documents was in the public interest, and indeed there's been a very strong argument that this relentless pursuit over so many years by US authorities does have, indeed, as you said, a chilling effect on the ability of journalists to hold powerful countries, individuals, and companies to account.
Let's move on to Madagascar now, and of course it's one of the place of huge biodiversity, but some of the natural forests are shrinking. They are in serious danger now.
Yes, and this story reminded me of a trip that I took myself to Madagascar exactly 24 years ago. I remember because the European Championship Football of 2000 tournament was going on at that time, and I wrote about the deforestation of Madagascar, the damage that was being caused by wild gem mining at that time. And in one sense, this is not a new story. Deforestation is obviously a worldwide problem. Well, rich countries, many of them cut down their forests a long time ago, so we're now reliant on the forests of some poorer middle-income countries to be the lungs of the world. And Madagascar obviously has this sort of unique status, this island with a large number of endemic species. But as this Le Monde piece points out, those forests are shrinking under pressure as well of slash and burn agriculture, and some estimates are that there are now only about half the forests there were even as recently as 1950, and it's a measure of the challenge to stop this remorseless process of deforestation, which is one of the great environmental challenges of our time.
I mean, some of these figures are horrific. 80,000 hectares of natural forest went in 2023.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things, and I've reported on this as well from Cambodia, for example, that the shrinkage that's shown through very starkly through satellite photos is just extraordinary and awful. And of course, there are some of the same arguments that go on with climate change, that rich countries which have mostly cut down their own forests, can they put in funding which helps to set up mechanisms to give incentives for poorer countries and people there to preserve these forests? Well, it seems we see from this Madagascar story and others that isn't really working in the meaningful way it needs to.
Now, on the briefing yesterday on this station, we looked at a story from the Dutch research think tank Clingendael Institute, looking at Nigeria and the Sahel, and the fact that there's a great deal of worry about people crossing into Nigeria and the increased violence there. You've picked up a story about that too today.
Yes, that's right. No, Nigeria is a country I used to live in and report on myself about 20 years ago. And the President Bola Tinubu has given a big speech vowing that his administration will not rest until it has brought security back to the country. And he talks about institutional frailties governing security, the economic dysfunctions that create vulnerabilities to crime, and what he describes as the ideological mischief that has damaged the peace and security in the region. And this is important in itself because Nigeria has had security problems for years. Of course, people know perhaps about Boko Haram, the movement in the north, and the kidnappings and other violence it conducts. But there's economic insecurity everywhere. The oil region in the south has long been a battleground between militants and oil companies and others. And I picked this one because Nigeria is a country that generally doesn't really get the attention it deserves, considering its size. By 2050, it might be the third largest country in the world by population, according to projections, displacing the US. And so it really matters what goes on here. And it's something that I think people should be paying more attention to.
Absolutely. On to a story that you wrote, actually, and I'm interested to know if you've experimented with it yourself. And this is the use of ketamine for depression.
Yes, this was an interesting story about how ketamine, which has long been used as an anesthetic and a party drug, has found a new life as a treatment for depression, which resists other therapies. And the story I wrote about yesterday and appeared in the paper today is that they found that delivering ketamine orally through tablet form can be much better than delivering it nasally or intravenously, in the sense that it would have fewer side effects. And this is actually really helpful because some of the side effects of taking it nasally or intravenously can be quite unpleasant. Raised blood pressure, has a sedative effect, and also dissociation is reported by some patients. And so this could actually be really helpful in allowing the treatment to be done more simply and more cheaply, and indeed allowing people to administer these tablets at home.
Have you tried it?
I haven't, but there's a lot of interest in it at the moment, and it's scientifically it's interesting as well because it seems like that the breakdown products from the body, from the liver of the drug, have an antidepressive effect, which is why you can take it orally, because they're broken down in the liver, and the ketamine itself doesn't enter the bloodstream, but the breakdown products do, and that still has the effect of antidepressant that you seek.
Finally, let's go to Thailand and a monkey problem.
Yeah, this is in the town of Lopburi, and some listeners may be familiar with this because some of the footage from this town has gone viral in recent months, and it basically shows monkey gang warfare. I mean, huge numbers of monkeys in groups battling it out in the city centre, and it's become a kind of a real problem for the town, and actually sort of disrupting people's movement, disrupting business in the town. There's these monkeys maraud about the place. Authorities have reported that they've actually captured 1,200 of an estimated 3,000 monkeys that are running loose, and relocated them to an animal care facility where they'll be registered, tested for diseases and sterilised. But they can't go any further because the cages are now full. And local businesses, local people have welcomed this, according to reports. But obviously the process is not finished yet. And the problem now is that it's expensive, that the daily feeding can cost 50 cents, more than 50 cents, US cents per monkey. And that can run to $20,000 or so a month. That's 50 cents a day. And so local authorities are appealing for help from the government. So the monkey wars of Lopburi might not be quite over just yet.
Michael Peel, thank you very much indeed. It is 7:14 here in London, 3:14 in Buenos Aires. Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, who's described himself as an anarcho-capitalist, has been on a foreign jolly. Indeed, his international travels have been so frequent that those at home are questioning his domestic goals and his use of public funds. There are also concerns about his radical economic plans. Well, here to examine where he's been, who he's met and what he's achieved is Oscar Guardiola-Rivera, who's professor in international law and international affairs at Birkbeck College. Welcome, Oscar.
It's a pleasure being here.
Let's start by looking at what the International Monetary Fund's reaction has been to this man who's promised to take a chainsaw to Argentina's economy. Initially, he earned praise from the IMF and investors for his sweeping packages of laws, but this no longer appears to be the case. What are the concerns?
It is no longer the case because if you read the Argentinian press today, for instance, Página 12, first item in the news is the fall in gross product to levels worse than they were in 2023 when Argentina suffered the worst drought in recent history, thereby affecting the economy. So this time you cannot make NATO responsible. This is clearly what is the result of Milei's politics. And so Milei's reaction, to everybody's amazement, has been to call the International Monetary Fund zurdo, meaning leftist in his parlance.
Let's talk about his travels now. So his most recent jaunt was to Germany. He had an unusually short meeting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It was pretty low-key. There was no press conference. He cancelled that. He cancelled the conferring of military honours. Why?
The whole visit was very strange. And in fact, your slippage there was correct. Travels and troubles do seem to go hand in hand when it comes to Milei. In the case of Germany, and we'll talk about Spain and the Czech Republic afterwards, this was probably the highest point of his visit to Europe. He was the only key authority he met. And he was received with huge protest in Hamburg, where he received, and this was the point of the visit, the Hayek Medal, after the controversial, some might say, economist Friedrich von Hayek. But the controversy was that it wasn't clear that the institute was actually given the medal. The president of the institute pretty much disowned the whole thing. To make matters worse, there is an internal war in the Hayek Institute because of because of being perceived as not distancing itself from Alternative für Deutschland and the other far-right groups. In fact, members of Alternative für Deutschland, Beatrix von Fuster, for instance, were present apparently during the ceremony. Hugely problematic indeed for the SPD government. And so because of the protest and the fact that Milei knew he was going to be queried about these very controversial presences there, he decided to cancel the press conference. There was, the visit was cut short. And in fact, he received a warning from the German government. It was very clearly put that the German government would be paying attention to whether or not the Argentinian Milei administration would keep hold of social cohesion and the social contract. Olaf Scholz's words precisely. And of course, those things those expressions were clearly against what Milei wanted from this visit.
One thing I know that was on the agenda was talks about lithium.
Talks about lithium are the one thing that they seem to be in agreement. Also, foreign policy. It is very clear that Germany, like many other countries in the West, are interested in Argentinian lithium. Argentina, together with Bolivia, have some of the biggest world reserves of this material, which is key for electronics and other things such as electronic cars and so on. Green hydrogen was also in the agenda. and therefore the possibilities of going ahead with the agreement between the European Union and Mercosur were there. Other than that, it is very clear, at least for the Argentinian press, that these travels only bring troubles.
He's been in Spain. Now, he was in Madrid just a few weeks ago, and that sparked huge controversy and a diplomatic spat when he insulted Pedro Sanchez's wife. Who did he see and what did he do this time?
Well, the one person he saw, again, Yolanda Díaz Ayuso, the very controversial president of the Madrid community government. He was given yet another peculiar award. In fact, this award was also questioned, and moreover, there was no clear sense of any kind of agreement that would benefit the Argentinian people. Rather than that, again, we see the same kind of rapprochement with what the Madrid press, the Spanish press, calls, and Pedro Sanchez himself called La Internacional Ultra, meaning the ultra-right international, or in more colloquial terms, the neo-fascist international.
Yeah. Now, the visit concluded in Czech Republic.
Here again, he gets another strange award because similarly, as it had happened in Germany, it seems to be the case that the organization itself, or at least its leadership, did not give the award. Supposedly was some member within the institute. These are, all of them, neoliberal think tanks. But here, neoliberal is probably too soft a term. Most of these think tanks are, as in the case of the German one, are very, very perilously close to far-right movements and far-right parties. Again, well, here he did met with the he met with the Czech president. There were a couple of agreements in terms of military cooperation. But again, another visit mired in controversy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is it fair to say this trip was all about appeasing far-right leaders, and how is it being judged back home in Argentina?
It's absolutely clear that this is what Milei is doing, but this is part of a wider strategy, particularly in the Americas, specifically in Latin America. It is very clear that right-wing parties in Latin America are trying to copy the relative success of far-right parties in Europe. And so you see people like Bukele from El Salvador or Milei being mobilized. And these travels abroad they attempt to bring the impression in Latin America that there is some international recognition or even acceptance to this. We're seeing the emergence of similar leaders in places like Colombia, where a journalist named Vicky Davila is beginning to sound a lot like Milei, and other places. So to many in Latin America, this is part of a wider strategy. Of course, the facts of these visits, travels bring troubles, do mean a lot of trouble for these forces. Add to that the fact that the economic plan of Milei seems not to be working. As I said before, gross product has fallen, unemployment is skyrocketing, and that's the proof in the pudding, as we say here.
Oscar, thank you very much indeed. That's Oscar Guardiola-Rivera. Now, still to come on the programme, the second in our series in our Quality of Life survey.
Last year, Zurich had a record number of overnight stays, and it remains a city in which outsiders are keen to put down roots. More than 30% of residents were born abroad.
This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now, last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin wrapped up his visit to North Korea, where he met with the country's supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. Although a Russian leader has not set foot in Pyongyang in nearly a quarter of a century, the pair clearly warmed to each other, reaching a pact vowing mutual defence assistance if either is attacked. Here, Andrew Muller explains why a good relationship is so advantageous for both Moscow and Pyongyang.
It would be riveting to know when President Vladimir Putin of Russia ordered his legions across Ukraine's border back in February 2022 what he thought he would be doing round about now. Steepling his fingers and plotting his next triumphal conquest, possibly. Fresh from attending the ceremony at which Kyiv was renamed Putingrad, the independence monument in Maidan Nezhalezhnost, now replaced with a forbiddingly sullen statue of himself. However, as the world has learned, and the hard way repeatedly, it's never easy to be certain what Putin thinks or has thought. His administration has not been any more a model of transparency than a given concrete slab. His more recent public utterances have been a strange mix of paranoid rambling and cod mystical history lectures, and his word in general has proved roughly as reliable as Russia's military hardware, tens of thousands of wrecks of which are now littering the fields of Ukraine's east. But it seems a reasonably safe bet that whatever the Putin of February 2022 thought the Putin of June 2024 would be doing, it was not panhandling in Pyongyang. We are where we are, however, and Putin is therefore visiting North Korea for the first time since 2000. Back then, Putin had just become president and had a couple of days in between meeting then-Chinese President Jiang Zemin in Beijing and then heading to Okinawa for the G8 summit, which was the kind of swanky international wingding to which Russia used to get invited, when hope was still at large that Russia was toying with becoming, at last, a vaguely normal country, or had at least grown out of its predatory tendencies towards the Western neighbours it had held hostage for most of the late 20th century. Putin conferred with North Korea's then Supreme Leader Kim Jong-il, father of the incumbent, who he subsequently hosted in Moscow in 2001 and 2002. The pair harmonized on some pro forma grumbling about the United States, but nobody really took it all that seriously, especially after Russia supported UN sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear weapons program. But even before Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022, relations between Moscow and Pyongyang had grown somewhat warmer. Shortly after Kim Jong-il was succeeded by Kim Jong-un, Russia wrote off a considerable whack of debt that North Korea owed it. In 2019, Putin welcomed Kim Jong-un to Vladivostok.
I propose a toast for the further strengthening of friendship and cooperation between Russia and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, for the prosperity of the peoples of our countries.
And last year, with Russia's 72-hour lightning conquest of Ukraine by then in its 18th month, Kim's armoured train rolled to the Vostochny Cosmodrome, also in Russia's Far East, also further to travel for host than guest. Kim vouchsafed what he called North Korea's invincible comrade-in-arms relations with Russia and praised Russia for its anti-imperialist stance, an intriguing characterization of invading someone else's country and attempting to annex chunks of it to your own. If we assume, however, that Putin has not travelled all this way for the coherent political analysis and/or an especially exclusive fridge magnet, we have to ponder what it is he does want. First, and most obviously, Putin wants more stuff to fire at Ukraine. It is beyond much serious doubt that North Korea is supplying Russia with ammunition. Investigators from Conflict Armament Research have identified North Korean missile wreckage in Ukraine, along with evidence that said missiles are crammed with European and American parts, which North Korea has somehow acquired despite sanctions. Boffins at the Royal United Services Institute have tracked 4 Russian cargo ships chugging back and forth to North Korea. RUSI estimates that at least 7,000 containers have already been delivered. However, the procurement of weapons does not necessitate schlepping all the way to a place and then sitting through hours and bloody hours of remorseless ceremonial caper while doggedly maintaining a facial expression which does not radiate murderous boredom. And judging from the footage which has emerged from Pyongyang, Putin is copping it especially heavy on the choirs of flag-waving infants front. You could almost feel sorry for him. And doubtless North Korea would be happy enough with a check. But Putin and Kim both want the spectacle as a demonstration and/or warning of their burgeoning alliance. It's a relationship which suits Russia and North Korea, at least within the diplomatic limits placed upon each by pariah or semi-pariah status. Russia gets not only the hardware, but a partner in the parallel world order Putin mutters intermittently about assembling. Prior to embarking, he had someone write an op-ed for North Korean state media, like North Korea has any other kind, in which he welcomed North Korea aboard his crusade to prevent the West from, as his amanuensis put it, hindering the establishment of a multipolar world order based on mutual respect for justice. Which is arguably somewhat lofty talk from someone whose travel plans are limited by the reach of an ICC arrest warrant. North Korea gets Russia's money, possibly, or so it hopes, some of Russia's military technology, a patron and protector it can play off against China, and attention, a commodity North Korea values to the extent that, as has recently been demonstrated, it will descend to such puerile pranks as floating bags full of garbage attached to balloons over the demilitarized zone into a baffled South Korea. Russia and North Korea have also signed some sort of mutual defence pact, each promising to saddle up should the other find itself beleaguered, showing that Russia and North Korea, whatever their other dissimilarities, share a failure to reflect on their rancorous relations with their neighbours and wonder if the problem might be them. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Many thanks there to Andrew. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. 2 Israeli airstrikes targeting aid supplies killed at least 11 Palestinians in Gaza yesterday, medics said, as Israeli tanks pushed deeper into Rafah in the south and fought their way back into areas in the north they'd already subdued months ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the phase of intense fighting against Hamas would end very soon and forces based in Gaza would be freed to move to the north, where Israel has warned of a potential full-blown war against Lebanon's Hezbollah movement. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is due to plead guilty on Wednesday to violating US espionage law in a deal that will end his imprisonment in Britain and allow him to return home to Australia after a 14-year legal odyssey. Assange was indicted during former President Donald Trump's administration over WikiLeaks' mass release of secret US documents, which were leaked by Chelsea Manning, a former US military intelligence analyst who was also prosecuted under the Espionage Act. And the European Union will open membership talks with Ukraine today, giving the country a political boost in the midst of its war against Russia's invasion, although a long and tough road still lies ahead before it can join the bloc. The ceremony in Luxembourg will be more about symbolism than the nitty-gritty of negotiations, which will start in earnest only after the EU has screened reams of Ukrainian legislation to assess all the reforms needed to meet the bloc's standards. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, all this week on The Globalist, we're unpacking our annual Quality of Life survey, ranking the world's top 20 most livable cities. Today, we turn our attention to the city which took the 3rd place in our ranking, the health-conscious harbour city of Zurich. Monocle's Carlo Silberschmidt explains why.
Zurich retains its status as that rare thing, a quaint harbour city in a landlocked country, where the trains and trams run on time. But you knew that already. What you might not know is that the city's food scene is currently benefiting from a new wave of young restaurateurs, many of whom are graduates of Switzerland's celebrated hospitality schools. This means that the service runs on time too. There has also been a spate of infrastructure projects across Zurich, including new tram lines, refreshed train stations, and verdant parks in hitherto lesser served parts of the city. Last year, Zurich had a record number of overnight stays, and it remains a city in which outsiders are keen to put down roots. More than 30% of residents were born abroad. Many were drawn here by the high living standards and salaries, but also by the opportunity to live a happy and healthy life. Some 76% of the population exercises at least once a week. An impressive statistic that reflects the wide range of walking, swimming and team sports clubs in the city, many of which are integral to its social scene. While Zurich's residents admirably make the effort to stay in shape, the city itself could do with a little extra maintenance. Specifically, the authorities urgently need to get a grip on the widespread graffiti problem. If the city wants to win its bid to host next year's Eurovision Song Contest, it should put on its freshest, cleanest attire.
Monocle's Carlo Silberschmidt there. Tune in tomorrow at the same time as we'll reveal which city came in second in this year's Quality of Life survey. This is The Globalist. You're with Monocle Radio. It is 8:35 in Zurich, 2:35 in Washington, D.C. The news for plane maker Boeing looks increasingly grim. US prosecutors have recommended that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, should bring criminal charges against the airline giant. Well, Sally Gethin is an aviation analyst. She joins me in the studio now. Many thanks for coming in, Sally. What is this case all about? Can you give us the detail?
Well, at the core of this case is the integrity and the safety record of Boeing, which is basically the face of America in aviation. So, as we've all seen, it's had a really bumpy ride in the last several years. There were devastating fatal crashes, 2018 and 2019, where 346 people lost their lives. And this litigation goes back to those incidents, really, because at the time, the US government stipulated that Boeing had to comply with a string of conditions to make sure that this never happened again. So a compliance program, specific markers and goals. And Boeing was managing to give the appearance that it was doing that. In actual fact, it wasn't. There were a lot of things going wrong behind the scenes still, even after the pandemic had concluded. And so there was a condition in that agreement that the Department of Justice brought with Boeing that if Boeing didn't comply, that it was valid for 3 years. And then in the winter of this year, there was the Alaska Airlines incident where there was a plug door blowout, which could have been far worse than it actually was. And so it was 2 days before that agreement expired. And so the Department of Justice was legally in a position to bring a breach of agreement against Boeing. And that was about 6 months ago, and the deadline was set for July the 7th. Now we're coming up to that deadline, and so that's why these prosecutors are now looking at it and recommending to the department to bring criminal action against Boeing for breach, effectively defrauding the aviation regulator in the United States.
So Boeing disputes that it violated the settlement. So I wonder what the situation now. Will the DOJ go ahead and press charges, do you think?
So, it's like a bit of a cliffhanger, this, because even though prosecutors have recommended this, it's no guarantee that the Department of Justice will go ahead. I mean, in a way, when I said about Boeing being, the face of America in aviation, it supplies defence contracts to the government as well. So we have to see how the checks and balances system works and if the DOJ will really penalise Boeing. But the families are asking definitely for criminal prosecution. They even want specific officials and individuals who were running Boeing at the time of those crashes to be prosecuted, as well as a $2.5 billion fine they want levied against Boeing, and far more stringent action to be placed on Boeing. But yeah, we just don't know at this point.
I mean, the where the blame is apportioned is interesting. This is just the latest of the company's woes, and I wonder if it's down to bad management or just bad luck. Who is to blame?
It's not bad luck. I mean, knowing the aviation industry inside out as I do, it is safety first. That's the first principle of aviation. So there's bad luck might come with, say, clear air turbulence on a flight, something completely external. But the aviation industry runs on safety, and Boeing has had a continuous series of lapses in safety, starting on the assembly floor right through to how parts are managed or mismanaged. And in fact, that plug door blowout that I mentioned was down to the fact that it was never there were 4 bolts missing that would have kept that in place, and that came from their key supplier called Spirit Aerosystems. There's now some talk about whether Boeing will acquire Spirit Aerosystems. The other problem we have is it's the culture of Boeing needs a rapid overhaul, a robust overhaul. The regulator is calling all over Boeing to make sure that happens. There's been a cap put on the production capacity, so the amount of planes they can produce every month. So in a way, Boeing's in a kind of limbo. It can't become profitable for a while. And we have a CEO, Dave Calhoun, who's actually going to be leaving by the end of the year as well. So I think we have to look ahead to a couple of years to see what will happen with Boeing. There are some calls for it to be nationalised also, which would be interesting, although what that would look like is hard to tell. So we are at a critical juncture with this 7th of July deadline coming up, and it's make or break time for Boeing, and I think really the Department of Justice is it going to flex its muscle to its ultimate extent with this?
Absolutely. I mean, how much of an attempt has Boeing made to turn the company around?
Yes, well, it says it has done, complied with that programme. So it's defending its position. It's saying it hasn't breached that agreement that we discussed earlier, and that, it's facilitated whistleblowers to come forward. Although I understand that there are many more whistleblowers who are coming forward from problems that have been ongoing anyway. So the FAA has also put boots on the ground with Boeing as well, putting some of its own inspectors in there too, and it holds Boeing to account with monthly meetings and so on. But at the end of the day, when Boeing puts up its CEO in front of the Senate, as it did in the last couple of weeks, it all sounds great, fine words, but few people are allowed onto the inside with Boeing. So it's very hard to tell what actually is happening on the inside to bring about this transformation and bring it up to speed and up to standard. The main criticism has been that the top guys at Boeing have come from the financial world, and they put profit before safety. And so there are calls for changes not only to the management structure, but also the upper level, the C-suite level, so that safety it comes more from executives with an engineering background at the top.
Well, what about profit, though? What effect has this terrible press had on Boeing's value? Yes,
it can't really, like I said before, it can't really get its head above the water. I mean, we've got the International Farnborough air show coming up every 2 years. It takes place in the UK, and or France. And so it'll be interesting to see what the orders are announced, because that's when Airbus, Boeing's rival, goes head to head with Boeing, and customer orders are announced in the millions and beyond. And at the moment, Airbus has no cap on it's got no restraints on it beyond what it can physically produce at its assembly in its plants. But with Boeing, it does have this cap. So Boeing is starting to lag behind, and that's not good. It's not good for, for the value of the company. It's not good for its performance and profitability, and it's not good for its brand.
And just finally, has this knocked passenger confidence? Are people refusing to fly in Boeing-made planes?
They are indeed. There's lots of evidence of that, anecdotally, of course, and on social media. But I myself today spoke to a member of the public who was anxious that they were flying on a Boeing airplane tomorrow on a long-haul flight. I was able to reassure them that particular airplane type hasn't had problems, which is the B777. But the B787 and the B737 MAX do have had and do seem to continue to have issues. So Boeing said, yes, we've got it all covered from here on in, but we do still see these headlines popping up intermittently with issues, and we haven't heard the last from the whistleblowers either.
Sally, thank you very much indeed. That was aviation analyst Sally Gethin. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time to talk arts and culture now with Gabe Bullard, who's a journalist based in Basel. Welcome to you, Gabe. Let's talk about museums, because there seems to be a trend that some of them are hosting fewer big exhibits each year. Why is that?
Yeah, so this was a very interesting piece that the arts newspaper had been working on about museums seeing that staff burnout is pretty high, that they've maybe been doing 12 upwards of more exhibits per year, and now they're dropping that down. The Guggenheim Museum, for instance, in New York is down to 6 or fewer exhibits a year, mostly thinking about how can they make better use of their time. They're putting together, it's a lot of curatorial work. They spend years on these shows, and they want to give them a little bit more than a month to reach the public and really more deeply engage with the public instead of just coming for, one visit, seeing it and moving on. Maybe there's more docent tours, maybe there's more workshops around it, that sort of thing.
But public enthusiasm for these shows remains high.
Yes. And, some museums, it's a little bit different because they have more of a seasonal visitation. If they're catering mostly to visitors from outside of a city, they might try to put their best foot forward during the big tourist times instead of, putting through exhibits that might not draw as many locals as they would hope.
Now, let's talk about Taylor Swift. Are you a Swiftie?
I am Swiftie adjacent, I suppose.
So her Eras tour is making its stand in London.
Yes. So this big 8-night stand in London as the European tour ticks on. And, I think we're going to see a lot of different numbers come out about economic impact. But one interesting story here is how it might affect inflation numbers. And the reason for that is because these inflation numbers, they look at various sectors of the economy on certain days. And if you're happening to look at, say, hotels during a day when a ton of tourists are in town to see a concert, well, then your hotel prices prices are going to be way up, and we might have to reconsider the way that inflation numbers look, given, if they're taken during some of these periods.
I was absolutely astonished. Not so much by the price of tickets, which we've got used to, but by the merchandise and how much people were prepared to pay for branded sweatshirts or jewellery and so on.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think the tickets, as expensive as they are now only just a portion of the entire tour experience. We usually think, if you go to see a show from out of town even, there's the hotel, there's restaurants, there's the concert tickets and everything. But now I think people are spending much, much more to get merchandise, to show they were there, to have all these additional keepsakes and everything around with it. So a lot of money is going to be spent inside the arena itself, but where the real economic impact comes is all that spending around it, going to restaurants, staying in hotels.
It's extraordinary. Some very sensible people that I know are just kind of glitter struck by Taylor, including our producer here behind the glass.
there was the story of airline tickets really spiking for flights into the cities where tours are going on in ways that airlines just have never seen before. That there aren't so many flights from certain cities into London that are fully booked round the clock, but now they are.
Right. Well, if you're not going to see Taylor Swift, you're staying home watching television. A bit of a problem for Paramount and Warner and HBO, also in need of a hit.
Yes. So this merger with Paramount and Skydance has fallen through. On top of that, on the programming front, Kevin Costner says he's not coming back to Yellowstone for the end. That was Paramount Plus's big hit. And so they really need something. Even with that Skydance merger, they had been talking about potential cuts to staff, and they're going to need to find a partner for Paramount Plus. It looks like the reporting isn't strong that their streaming options are remaining as healthy or as profitable as they would hope.
Well, what's the story behind Costner and Yellowstone? Why is he not coming back?
So he is making his sprawling multi-part Western epic. He says, "I'll see you at the movies," and he is planning to continue being the movie star that he was previously before he had taken this detour into television.
Gabe, thank you very much indeed. That's Gabe Bullard there. And you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, in the town of Limburg in Germany, there's an ongoing row between residents and business owners on one side and animal rights activists on the other over what to do about the town's pigeons. Last November, the town's council decided that a falconer should be commissioned to decimate the pigeon population, which was met with fierce protests from animal rights activists. This led to a referendum this month in which it was decided that the amount of pigeons should be reduced, but a final review of the referendum result is still pending. Well, Stephen Moss is a naturalist and author of many books, including 10 Birds That Changed the World. Stephen, many thanks for joining us. Your lovely book has an entire chapter on pigeons, one of the birds that changed the world. You tell us that they proved to be extremely useful during World War II as message carriers. What else, or how else, have pigeons changed the world in a positive way?
Well, the thing about pigeons, Georgina, is that people sort of ignore them until they become a bit of a problem. But we've made that problem. These are birds that descended from a wild bird called the rock dove that lived on cliffs and crags in wild places in northern Europe. And we've domesticated them. And then, of course, they're quite clever birds. Despite their reputation, they escaped. And they do very, very well. And the key thing was in the war, they helped carry messages in at a time, for example, at D-Day, which of course we've heard of a lot lately, where if they'd used radio, if the Allied troops had used radio, the Germans would have known where they were and what they were doing, instead of which they sent messages by pigeon. So, that's enough, in my view, that they changed the world and that they had a material effect on the success of D-Day and indeed the entire Second World War.
Of course, they are a very divisive species, and I wonder to what extent humans and the way we treat our environment are responsible for the behaviour of pigeons and indeed other urban dwelling creatures.
Well, what we've done by building our cities is we've inadvertently created an opportunity for certain birds. And ironically, the two birds that are doing best, particularly in London, are pigeons and their nemesis, the peregrine falcon, which has moved in again from remote locations, cliffs, crags, sea cliffs, etc., and nests on our tall buildings in our cities, and then preys on pigeons, although actually in London now they prey mainly on parakeets because parakeets are more stupid than pigeons and are easier to catch.
Why are they attracted to urban areas?
Well, because a typical city, particularly a city like London that's grown up over the years, has got lots of little nooks and crannies for them to nest. It's got plenty of food, both provided accidentally by us, but also deliberately in, bird tables, garden bird feeders, etc. Cities are warmer than the surrounding countryside in winter. That makes a difference for certain birds. And pigeons are extraordinary because they nest all year round. So they can have several broods right through the year, particularly in our cities. So it's sort of our fault that they've done so well in cities, a bit like with urban gulls in the west of England where I live. And when a bird sort of gets into our lives, we tend not to like that very much. And the birds we tend to hate are the most intelligent birds: crows, pigeons, gulls, birds that have adapted to live alongside us, and we don't really like that.
I mean, if pigeons are eradicated from an area, what impact does that then have on other species and the whole natural order?
Well, it doesn't have much impact on other species, and because they are feral birds, because they're not naturally there, it doesn't really have an effect on the ecosystem. But of course, actually, it doesn't work, because as soon as you eradicate pigeons, as they're found with most culls, not all culls, but a lot of culls, what happens is you create opportunities for other birds to move in. So I think it was Ken Livingstone who stopped the feeding of pigeons in Trafalgar Square. And yes, there's very few pigeons in Trafalgar Square now because we're not providing food for them, but they're everywhere else in London and most cities around Britain and Europe. They're an incredibly successful bird, and I think we should learn to live alongside them rather than constantly, it's this anti-nature thing that it's not just the Germans, we have it much worse than they do, and I just think we should be more tolerant and be, if you watch a male pigeon approaching a female and she shows no interest whatsoever and he puffs up his feathers and walks around her and courts, it's an incredible thing to see, and it's usually a few feet away from you because of course they're not worried about humans being there.
As you say, the German town of Limburg is not alone in what it perceives to be its pigeon problem. I wonder if there are similar initiatives in other places to reduce pigeon numbers, how it's being done.
Well, the most famous way was celebrated by the great Tom Lehrer, the wonderful American satirist who sang a song called Poisoning Pigeons in the Park, which goes something like, on a sunny afternoon in the middle of June, and we're poisoning pigeons in the park. And that was based on a true story of the Central Park authorities in New York in the 60s putting strychnine-laced corn down to kill the pigeons. Can you imagine that now? Small children walking around and picking up bits of corn with strychnine in it. And again, it didn't work. These things never really work. And it's just a sort of, as I say, it's an anti-nature thing. It's a populist thing. Oh, let's kill all the pigeons. We'll get some more votes. I'm surprised Nigel Farage hasn't mentioned it in his manifesto, to be honest.
No, it's only foreign pigeons I think he's concerned about.
Yes, exactly.
What's the most humane way to control pigeon populations then?
Well, there isn't really. With a lot of these birds, they've tried this with gulls, is you either inject the eggs so they don't hatch, or they are looking at, with certain species, trying to provide some kind of contraceptive in the food that will basically mean that they don't have much breeding success. And that's really the only way. In the long term, you can only cut populations of birds down, not by killing them, but by not allowing them to raise enough young. Again, do we really want to do that? I mean, it just seems, given the state of the world at the moment, I think pigeons are possibly the least of our problems.
Absolutely. I have one burning question I've been longing to ask an expert. When you see a pigeon get on the tube, are they doing that because they want to go somewhere?
Yes, yeah, they're really good at this. This was first recorded by a wonderful man called Eric Sims, who I had the privilege to know many years ago, back in the 40s or 50s, I think it was. He saw pigeons getting on the tube in London. They actually got on the overground part of the tube, but then got off later on. And yeah, they're just moving around, and possibly looking for food. People drop food on the tube, so it might be that as well. But yeah, they're great birds. Let's celebrate them.
Stephen Moss, thank you very much indeed. I will not look at pigeons the same way again, ever. That's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Tom Webb and Monica Lillis, and our studio manager, Lily Austin. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. Lots of sharp programming coming up too, including The Briefing, which is live at midday in London. And The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.